but I believe that there are things called like Acton Academy or these places where you can move people from private school from one branch to another. In order to do the digital nomad thing, you could do it. You just have to live in fully furnished places and rent out for a year. Instead of doing, a couple of weeks at a time, I would just extend out the way that you're looking at this and maybe hop from place to place for a year. Let's say that there are 4 US cities that you guys would want to visit in the next 5 years. Well, why couldn't you do that the thing is you got to sell stuff or you got to get engaged with an Airbnb company to maybe rent out your current place. So that way you can use that income coming in to help basically pay for your lives while you're going and doing Airbnbs elsewhere. And so as long as your work situation allows it, where you can work online, you can start planning out these things piece by piece, and it will take more work and more planning. But I don't see why you couldn't do it if you really wanted to. It's just you have to have the will to do it and understand the vision and the why behind it to want to do it.
You're listening to the Guerrilla State Investing Podcast. We're not here to bruise your bananas with guru sales pitches, overrated fluff, or any other kind of monkey business. We simply provide the ground-pounding truth about what it takes to be successful in real estate.
Okay, and welcome back to another episode of Guerrilla State Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Magierowski. And today's episode is sponsored by From Middle Class to Millionaire Facebook group. It's one of the fastest growing Facebook groups out there. If you're looking to get out of the rat race and on the path to financial freedom, jump online, join the Facebook group for free, and get started. Today's guest is Derek Clifford with Elevate Equity. And Derek is actually a digital nomad. But before we jump into that, just want to talk about the fee for the show. Derek, do you know what the fee is for the show?
I do, but why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about it?
All right, the fee for the show is you've got to share the show. Okay, if you learn something, we make you laugh, we make you think, please share the episode, share the show with a friend. That's all we're asking. So without further ado, Derek, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brandon, it is so good to be on the show. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, man. When just for a little backstory, I was actually on Derek's podcast last week. And we met at the best ever real estate conference up there in Denver, Colorado. And for your listeners, that's just a conference where a bunch of real estate professionals, hardworking people get together, network, talk about goals and what they're going to do inside of real estate and how they can help each other. I'm going to kick off this show with one simple question for you, Derek, and I'm going to let you go with it, okay? How are you escaping the middle class?
Yeah, escaping is an interesting word because I think the one that would apply best to me is escaped. And the way I was able to do that was just seriously hard work, lots and lots of consistency. I had a full-time position working as a project manager at a utilities company in the California Bay Area. And heard Brandon Turner on Bigger Pockets one day mention an unfair advantage and how you have to take advantage of that unfair advantage. My unfair advantage was a high salary in the Bay Area. So what I did was back in 2017, I took his advice and started buying a whole bunch of single family rentals in the Midwest, right? Because you could buy a single family rental back then for like $50,000 to $60,000 and it would be a relatively good property. And so, that being said, with a down payment only being 25% of $50,000, that looks a lot like 10 to 12 or 15 grand, right? And being able to put that kind of money in, that was the money that I was making on a single paycheck some months, right? So that was crazy for me to be able to just start really leaning into the real estate investing. And, at that point, I just started to slowly accelerate and build property up at that point in time, and eventually started scaling up into multifamily because I ran out of loans. I could only do 10 loans with single families. And so then, we just snowballed from there, picked up some more partners. And when we started running out of cash ourselves, we started bringing in external people to continue building this machine, and eventually got to a point where last year, we just don't need the full-time work anymore. As a matter of fact, the full-time work was becoming a detriment to our potential for where we could be going if we had full control over our day. And the other piece to this, Brandon, that I like to mention is, by going through this process, we were starting to peel back layers, what we call the degrees of freedom. And the first degree of freedom that we got which started to kind of spur out the rest, was location freedom. During COVID, we had this ability to basically work from anywhere with my full-time job, as long as we were in the state of California, because we were California regulated utility. So we had to stay in the state. So we kind of had this partial location freedom going on. So we were enjoying being able to travel from place to place and just work wherever we wanted to work, right? Especially during COVID, it was very hard to go very far, but still we had the ability to go anywhere we wanted to. And then, a couple of months after that, we started getting properties in our contract. We started to get them, basically this machine started to pick up lots of steam and momentum, and then looked to eventually leave the full-time job. And when we left the full-time job, that's when we started to have this time freedom, right? We started to add that on. And with this time freedom on top of the locational freedom, that gave us all of these abilities to make tons and tons of choices. And as we got those 2 degrees of freedom, we craved the next one, which was financial. And the ironic thing, Brandon, about all this is, as we were traveling, we were actually spending less money than we were traveling and living in Airbnbs than we were living in the Bay Area in a house, paying a mortgage, paying utilities, paying all of that stuff. So if you look apples to apples, it actually helped improve our financial situation to sell our house, right? Start traveling fully. And it got us this financial freedom on top of the location and the time freedom that we've already created for ourselves. And if you have those 3 degrees of freedom, then you're pretty much there. You have full control of your choices. And then, of course, there's the health that we added in as well. That was the other component that was important to us, that we're working on the side, that also kind of facilitates and keeps all of those other 3 degrees moving well. Because without your health, you can't really do any of this stuff. Your quality of life is kind of down there. So in a summary, that's where we are right now, Brandon. We're just living the 3 degrees of freedom, escaped the middle class, and now we're in this place where we can live off of our investments and we don't have to have our own employment or W-2 regular paycheck coming in.
Okay. Well, that is a fantastic answer and brief history of where you started and how you got into real estate and what you're doing now. There's so many things to unpack in there. I was writing some notes. I want to ask you, you talk about the 3 degrees of freedom, and maybe it's 4 degrees because you talked about the health freedom, and that's super important. Health and mindset. You can't do those other three things right without it, and you know that. But going back to your W-2 job, what was your job? What were you doing?
I was a project manager.
Okay, you're a project manager. I'm just going to go straight to it. How much were you making a year?
I was making about, I'd say, $185,000 a year, and then bonuses of about 10% of my salary. So I would say somewhere around the 200 range. And then, of course, incredible benefits too, because it was a public utility.
Right. And that's tough to walk away from, right? That's a security blanket. You could do that for the next 20 years and retire and be happy and be free, but you'd probably be living in that single family home in California and not doing what you're doing now. So how many years were you a W-2 employee before you walked away?
Yeah. So I am 37 right now. So because I started work when I was 22, I guess that puts it right around 13 years. Okay. But I didn't discover real estate until 2017 or actually 2015 in a bigger way because of my wife. But yeah, other than that.
So what were you investing in pre-real estate in those years where you're making, $200,000? That money's got to go somewhere.
Yes. So a lot of that honestly was being put into the stock market because I had no other alternative, right? I experimented here and there with like Lending Club and, doing some sort of alternative investments, but it was nowhere near the level and the seriousness that I bring to real estate investing right now. Not even close. Really what it was, Brandon, is I had the Dave Ramsey mentality where I was just really focused on trying to pay down debt and skimp and save and try to, like, whatever money comes in, that's a tool to use to just pay down debt. And then paying down debt is the way to financial freedom. And now I know that is absolutely the opposite way of creating wealth, as long as you're buying productive debt. Anyway, that's a topic for another time, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Yeah,
we could do a 2-hour episode on Dave Ramsey mythology versus, real estate investing and the other way that we're going with it. Okay, so when you walk away from your W-2, you're giving up a $200,000 job. At that time, what was your passive income like monthly? Because I think that's a question for a lot of people, and myself, is like, okay, this guy's sitting here making 200 grand and he says he's going to make more by walking away. So at that point, were you replacing your income, or did you see the path to replace your income?
Brandon, I'll be honest here. I was nowhere close to create to my passive income, basically coming up to our expenses.
Right.
I would say that our passive income, because of our single families, I think we were only making like $2,000 a month or something off of those.
Okay.
Right. We built up a portfolio, and each one of those was throwing off about 50 to 100 to maybe even 125 a door. And while that was great and everything, we realized that we had a whole bunch of equity saved up in our properties. Like the market had appreciated a lot. And so we did a 1031 exchange and basically took all of those single families and converted them into multifamily. Mm-hmm. But, to go back to your original question about how much passive income we had and, worrying about replacing that 200,000, honestly, that wasn't part of our decision making. I know it seems crazy that a lot of people, when they make this decision of wanting to leave the job, it's like, okay, I got to build passive income up to enough to a point where it's got to equal what I'm making in my full-time job. And that is a monumental a challenge, basically. Mm-hmm. Even if you're a limited partner, right? If you're just making, $500,000 a year and you need to get to 15,000 a month in income, you have to do a lot of investing in limited partnerships. I'm talking millions of dollars, right? To make that happen. And that could take you many years to get to that level. But we decided that we want to take a leap of faith on ourselves and believe in ourselves. There are parts of this country, Brandon, where you can live very comfortably for $3,000 a month, right? With your food, entertainment, and also your housing, right? And so that's what we figured is our fallback plan, because we just sold our house. We had this giant cash reservoir that we could use, and we have all of our investments, right? So we made the decision that we owe it to ourselves to take the chance, because if we have this cash reservoir, right? We don't have kids yet. We want to travel. We want to see stuff. We want to take a chance on ourselves. We want to be entrepreneurial. We want to live an abundant life, a life of choice, right? Because we know that abundance breeds more abundance. Right. And so as we're living this abundant life, we're trying to attract all of these incredible things to us. And when we made the decision, it was like, we have to do this because I'm miserable at my job. We have cash. We have a runway of about a year to 2 years, depending on where we live. And we owe it to ourselves to give this a shot. And I think by thinking about it like that, and then thinking about also the worst case scenario, which is pulling the ripcord. Do you know what that is, Brandon? Do you know what the worst case scenario would be?
Going back to your W-2.
I got to go back to work.
Yeah.
So why the heck not try it?
Right.
So for those people who are, on the fence and the timing is right, you have to, that's why you can't make these decisions based on financial facts alone. You have to figure out what it is that's going to drive you and what's best for you and your family in the long term.
Yeah.
And for us, it was making this jump because we had to do it. We owed it to ourselves, and we knew we could control our expenses to some degree. And we knew that being in the abundant state was going to attract and create a bigger network of people. So when we do go back to the full-time job, we'll have a bigger network of people to be able to plug into to find that next job, and also have clarity on where that job would be. It doesn't have to be going back to the same work. It's more like, having more options out there. And so the more options you get, that's really the true definition of wealth in my mind is options.
And it's like putting your back against the wall too, Derek, right? You got this comfortable $200,000 a year job. You can do real estate. You can do it as whatever pace you want because you have this paycheck coming in. And the second you pull the cord on that and you say, I'm not doing the W-2, I'm going to eat everything I eat, I'm going to kill myself. Yeah. That's pressure, and that what creates, real entrepreneurship. I treat real estate as entrepreneurship because you're controlling your own destiny. The relationships you make, the properties you acquire, the things you invest in, you're in control of all that. So it's a bold move by you. But like you said, worst case scenario, you run out of cash and you go find another W-2 job. You're probably miserable again, but that's worst case scenario. So from the time that you quit, or walked away from the W-2, that you said that was 2017?
No, that was last year. That was
last year.
September last year.
And now you consider yourself a digital nomad.
Yes, sir.
Can you please define digital nomad?
Yeah. So a digital nomad is just someone that, or at least there's a lot of ways to look at this. Like some people say you have to be in the coding industry or in the computer sciences. But the way I think about it is that as long as you have an internet connection, you can do your life's work. And for me, that's very much true. This age of social media now, Zoom calls, right? We can thank the pandemic for the familiarity and the comfort of a lot of people to get on Zoom calls now instead of meet face to face. And so that's a really big deal. Obviously, meeting face to face is ideal, but having these kind of connections and conversations through the internet, right, has just really enabled a life of choice for us. So as long as we have power and internet, we can really work from anywhere. There may be some time zone issues and things that you have to work out. So you have to like be organized in terms of when you can meet and when you're available. But other than that, as long as you can do your job through the internet from anywhere, that's what I consider a digital nomad. And especially if you're traveling abroad and you don't have a fixed place for more than a couple months, then that would be something that I consider a nomad, the nomad part of that digital nomad.
So as a nomad, where are you right now?
Yeah. So right now we're currently recording this in Las Vegas, Nevada, but next week we're heading off to Lisbon, Portugal. And we're going to be in Europe for 4 months, actually. So we're really excited for that. And believe it or not, Brandon, living in Europe, it was cheaper than the Bay Area. Almost every place that we've been to, except for a few places, on a day per day basis, if you back out the numbers and everything, it's cheaper than living in the California Bay Area. So if you live in an expensive market, I'm talking to the audience right now, consider, this, if you're in a position where I am, where you have a skill set that you can jump into and potentially leave your full-time job that you'd be more fulfilled and happy. Consider this, that like even making this jump into this type of lifestyle where you're living out of 6 suitcases, which is what we have. That's all we have. We have a car and 6 suitcases, no house, no anything, that your expenses get really low. Like you just have an Airbnb to pay for, which is your housing, and they take care of all the utilities. And you just got to basically have food and entertain yourself. And that's pretty much all you have to pay for.
How far out are you planning these trips? Like how often, like give me a year, give me last year. How many different places did you live and how far out are you planning where you're going?
Yeah. So we started this journey about a year ago and we've been to 25. This is our 26th Airbnb. So we've been to about 24 or 23 different cities all inside the United States. Just because of COVID, it was hard to leave the country, right? And then come back safely. So that's changing next week. Obviously, we're going to be going out to Europe. But yeah, we usually stay about 2 to 3 weeks at each location because that is enough to give us a taste of what the culture and the food and, just the general nature around the area is like. And kind of start to take on some of the energy. And, there's also another thing that we're doing with this too, Brandon, is that, while we're traveling, we're also looking at where eventually we want to either live or have a home base. And so right now we're thinking it's going to be Washington State and San Diego. So Washington State, obviously for the summer, and then San Diego down for the winter. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And it's an incredible opportunity to be able to explore what works for my wife and I.
So what's the long-term plan with that? How many years do you plan on doing the nomad versus, and then getting settled? Like you said, you travel around the places, you travel around the world. 2 years passes, you finally say, hey, it's going to be Washington. We're going to Washington. Or do you just continue down the path? Have you thought about that?
We have, yeah. Especially my wife has been asking that question a lot recently because she's starting to want to get, roots settled down and stuff like that. And I can totally understand. Yeah. But we're still having that conversation. And I would say that most likely what'll happen, Brandon, is we'll probably end up like doing a rental situation. Like we'll probably do like this thing called landing or, places where you can basically rent apartments for many months at a time. Yeah. And so I think that the way I see this unfolding is that our length of time for our stays are going to just start increasing, right? For wherever we're at. And then eventually wherever we end up landing, we'll just spend more and more time there until we end up buying a house there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
How I see it's ending.
I think a challenge maybe for some people listening in would be, hey, Derek, I have 2 kids at home and we both have full-time jobs and we have a mortgage. Like how can we ever do something like that, especially with kids? And I'm thinking of myself, I have 3 young boys, right?
Yep.
being they got to go to school. I'm not going to homeschool. I don't have the patience for it. I just can't do it. That's just me. My wife is a teacher. I have several different businesses and I do real estate. It's not for everybody. So what advice would you give to maybe that family of four that can't do that? They can't be the digital nomad. How do they cut expenses? How do they create that financial freedom? How do they set themselves up for a position where they can walk away from their W-2?
Yeah, I think that, that is that's one of the reasons why we're able to do this is we don't have children yet. And I think that's one thing that you really have to weigh out. I believe that I'd have to double check this, but I believe that there are things called like Acton Academy or these places where you can move people from private school from one branch to another. And I think in order to do the digital nomad thing, you could do it. You just have to live in furnished places, fully furnished places, and rent out for a year. Okay. I would say that instead of doing, every week, a couple of weeks at a time, I would just extend out the way that you're looking at this and maybe hop from place to place for a year. Let's say that there are 4 US cities that you guys would want to visit in the next 5 years. Well, why couldn't you do that the thing is you got to sell stuff or you got to get engaged with an Airbnb company to maybe rent out your current place as a rental. So that way you can use that income coming in to help, basically pay for your lives while you're going and doing Airbnbs elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so as long as your work situation allows it, where you can work online, right? Or you can work or get transferred to another branch, you can start planning out these things piece by piece, and it will take more work and more planning, but I don't see why you couldn't do it if you really wanted to. There just doesn't, I don't think that it's an unconquerable thing. It's just, you have to have the will to do it and understand the vision and the why behind it to want to do it.
That's awesome stuff, man. Well, let's go back to, this is apparently a real estate podcast. Let's talk some real estate. You said you transitioned in 2017, found real estate, started with single family and moved to multifamily. Mm-hmm. What kind of asset classes are you acquiring and what roles are you playing within those acquisitions?
Yeah, great question. So right now it's still all multifamily, but what we're looking for is workforce housing, BC type assets. Those are like, suburban assets or urban core that have some sort of like value add component. So that way, when we get involved with investors, we can create value right away from the beginning. So we don't have to worry about what the valuation of the properties are going to be in the future. Mm-hmm. And so, we're just looking at properties right now in the Midwest and down in Texas as well. We like the dynamics in both of those markets, just because in the Midwest, like it's one of those last, places in the country where it's cheap, to live. And there's amenities there that make it feel like you're in a first-class metropolitan type area, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's starting to disappear across the nation as the Southeast starts to get really full. The West and the East Coast are already really, really expensive. And so I think that Midwest piece is kind of like this magic area that's going to see a lot of growth in the next couple of years. And then in Texas, of course, you can't deny the power of Texas, right? You have lots of people and demographics moving into the cities. So I really like the San Antonio area right now. And then interesting enough, Corpus Christi and Brownsville down south towards Mexico. I think that's also a very interesting dynamic that I'm looking at right now as well. Okay. And
what's your sweet spot of the role you're playing inside of these deals?
Yeah.
Are you acquisitions? Are you capital raising? Are you operations, asset management? What's your go-to?
Yeah, I really wish that I could give you a go-to, but right now I'm wearing all the hats, which is kind of a role that I'm working on right now, trying to get out of, because I'm doing capital raising for stuff in Texas, and then for my network in Indianapolis, I'm doing full on acquisitions. I'm doing full on, due diligence and loan preparation and all that good stuff, and then asset management as well. So I'm basically full source service for the Indianapolis market. But I'm starting to take components of what I'm doing and automate them, especially on the capital raising side, right? Like social media presence and, marketing and all that stuff. That's been a huge challenge, but with the help of virtual assistants and everything, every challenge is conquerable, and it just takes a matter of time and thinking through a process that helps create a lot of efficiency for the business and for our team.
And you have your own podcast too, correct?
Yes, sir. And we have a book.
Why don't you give us a little taste? I was on the podcast. It was great. It's a real estate based podcast, but why don't you give the listeners just a a glimpse of why you're doing the podcast, what kind of guests you've had, and what's it about.
Yeah, Brandon, thanks again for allowing me, the space to have this. But our podcast is based on, well, we had 2 seasons. The first season was every episode was my wife and I interviewing couples who have done really well, because there's always a spouse behind a successful investor. Always, right? There's always support. And so whether that person is supporting in a passive way, meaning, taking care of the kids, working a W-2, or maybe doing both of that to enable the time, energy, and financial space for you to pursue what you do as a real estate investor, that cannot be understated, right? That partnership there. And so that never gets talked about. And so we like to talk about people's journeys about how that worked and those real conversations that happened at home to help enable that partnership to work. And then our second season is focused more on individuals that have a special power or strength. And we had you on the podcast as well, which was awesome. And we talked a lot about building trust, right? And building relationships with investors and team members, which you're an excellent individual. You've got tons and tons of experience doing that, and people trust you for that. And so we want to explore that a little bit more. And then what we do is we take your episode, and my wife and I listen to it, and we discuss about what we heard and took away from you. So we still have the couples component, but we're focusing on, helping the individuals understand what makes you world-class at what you do.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you and your wife, after the fact, listened to it as if it was new to you, right? And just kind of dive in and go, what did he say that could help us on our journey? And what did he say that could help others when we're promoting the podcast? So your wife, you talk about the power of the spouse. Every spouse plays a different role inside of this entrepreneurship and business. Some what they call silent partners, where, they're not active in the business, but they are there supporting, allowing you to go travel. It sounds like your wife is a lot more active in the business. Can you give us a little brief on that?
She is, but she's not as active as you may think, because she's very much on the visionary side. Okay. It's probably no secret to you that I'm an integrator. I like to pull pieces together and work through details. That's just my upbringing and coming from the engineering background and the project management background. I love to put details together and make something big, give it some wheels, right? And make sure that it actually moves forward. But my wife is very visionary, and she's helped me, first of all, discover what real estate investing is and how it can be a viable business. But she also pushed me to leave my full-time job. She's the one who pushed me. Like, that's really rare, you guys, right? Like, most wives would be like, no, you've got to keep your income. You're not allowed to leave.
Yeah.
But she was like, if you're not happy, we have to make this happen. We have to do it. So she's really the visionary behind like the whole life balance with everything. And she's also helped bring investors to the table, right? Make those very invaluable connections. And she's also helped with, the fact that I will proverbially stand in front of the wall, Brandon. And if my goal is to make a hole in the wall, I'll use my head to literally bash my head against it as many times as I can, where she'll come by and give me a hammer, proverbially, right? To be able to make analogy. It happen. Like, because she understands me. She knows my blind spots. She knows where I'm weak, and she knows where she's strong. Yeah. And if she sees that I'm struggling or going in circles over and over again, she's going to give me a tool to help get me out of that. And so she's involved in not necessarily the day-to-day, but I'd say very much that she is a visionary person. And so whenever we talk about the business at all, she's always like, I wonder if you could do this, or here's a person that I met that might be useful to you. And so that's why it's so important to have that extra person who really is on your side. And there's no one else on the planet that should be on your side more than your spouse. And so why not plug them into the business? Why not bring them in to the things that they like to do and they're good at and you trust them with? And so that's why we work together well.
No, that's awesome, because my wife and I are actually having those conversations. So she's a full-time teacher. And like I said, I have a few different businesses that I run, including real estate. And I'm always thinking of ways like, I want to get you involved. She takes care of the kids, she teaches, and then, she comes home and there's a lot of responsibility behind the scenes with the family. And so we're trying to dig out time and where she fits within the business, but it's going to take us having her walk away from her job. And that may be what it takes to say, hey, we don't have that income anymore. You got to come over here and help me. Kind of like what you did is you walked away, put your back against the wall and say, hey, it's up to me now. That check is not hitting the mailbox this month. So I've got to figure out a way to reduce expenses and start generating income. So it's great advice, especially for, I mean, again, we kind of go back to the middle class, Eric, of, I don't know, millions and millions of people that are just stuck at a W-2 job and scared to get out of it because of that lost revenue. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And if that check doesn't come in the mailbox, they miss their mortgage payments. So it's a super challenging spot to be in. I've been there. I've escaped. I'm on my path to some financial freedom. I'm still young like you, 37, and I've got a lot of years, but I have a plan where I'm not going to need anything but my real estate income in 5 years. And I'll have the freedom to do what I want when I want. And that's truly what financial freedom is. It's not about money. It's about doing what you want and when you want. And when someone asks you to do something, you can just tell them no. That's what financial freedom is, right?
Freedom of choice. Yeah,
freedom
absolutely.
of choice. Put that on your degrees of freedom. You'll have like 10 degrees of freedom by the end of this thing. In the pre-conversation of the podcast, Eric, you mentioned a book did you write the book yourself, or was it a co-op?
No, it was all me. I wrote it in 30 days as well.
Yeah. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background about that book and where people can find it?
Sure. I think I'll keep this brief, but it's really not that complicated. I wish that I had this, stroke of inspiration, like a lightning bolt hitting me. But really what it was is, as I was building my single family portfolio at my place of employment, at my job, a lot of people were watching what I was doing, and they had all these questions, and I kept answering the same questions over and over again. And then, I eventually got the insight to be able to ask them, hey, if I wrote this in a book, would that help you guys? Would that help you understand this, so that way I don't have to answer the same questions over and over again? And they emphatically said yes. So that kind of gave birth to the idea of writing a book. I got trained up in book writing and how to write a book and everything through the self-publishing school, which I highly recommend. And by the way, sidebar, Brandon, you and even you, the listener, you all have a book in you. It doesn't have to be a massive tome like War and Peace. As a matter of fact, that won't sell. What does sell is a sub 100-page book, something that tells your story and tells you, everyone, about the principles that you use to live. If there's a moral behind it or anything, and there's a following, like, it'd be so great to be able to encapsulate all that wisdom into a book. And that is such a better business card than an actual business card, right? If you give that book to someone, there's something about a book, Brandon, that you don't want to throw away. Instead, you'll keep the book or you'll give it to someone else. And it's just very hard for most people to just throw books away. So that's why I think it's really important to do that. In any event, I wrote this book, and it's for working full-time professionals to set up a side hustle doing real estate, whether you want to be active, which is, doing single family homes, buying turnkeys, or doing your own properties, right? Or you want to be a passive investor. It's got everything for that. And the first half of the book is all mindset, expectations, working with your spouse, all the really like nitty gritty things that most people don't even think about, but we had to figure out. Like, me and my wife had spent years trying to figure all this stuff out and making tons of mistakes. And the second half of the book is execution. And because I'm a project manager, I even laid out on a Gantt chart, like, all the things I did to go from starting from scratch to deciding to buy a property to actually closing on the property, and how long each of those activities took and what sequence they were in. So if any of that appeals to you, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a great primer for somewhere to start at the beginning to how to approach investing, while you're working a full-time job. And again, most of it is mindset, Brandon, as you already know. Yeah. Where can people find the book, Derek? Yeah, you can just go on Amazon and just type my name in, which is Derek Clifford, because it is quite a mouthful to type into the search bar. Or you can go to our website as well, which is elevateequity.org. And then there's a link under education for the book, and it will take you straight to the Amazon That's awesome. Page. I think a lot of people have this vision of writing a book. I do. I always say, it's on my bucket list. I want to write a book. But the fear is, okay, I have all this information in my head. I have all these notes all over my computer. I have a journal that I've written in. It's like, where do I even start to compile this information together? And how do I put it in a book to make it flow? That's the fear, right? The fear is the work of taking
all the crap that I've written and compiling into less than 100 pages and having it make sense and having it geared towards kind of one thing, like you're geared towards helping a side hustle for real estate. I have all these different ideas. How do I hone in? And I'm being super selfish right now. I'm just going to ask about
No, it's
me.
cool.
How do I hone that in? How do I take all this information that I've learned, that I've done, that I've written down, and put it into less than 100 pages?
Those concerns that you just mentioned, right, about, having it be a coherent piece of work, right? That is not your job.
Okay.
That's the editor's job to help you with that. So first, I want to alleviate that. When you hire an editor, that's what they're supposed to do. They'll help you organize it and make sure that it makes sense, but you can help them, right, by starting off with a mind map. That's what I did. And this is what they teach in the self-publishing school is you start with the central message of the book, right? Like of everything that you're talking about, right? What is that central message that you can use to reach your audience? And then I'm talking clearly nonfiction here too, right? So whatever your central message is, draw a big circle in the middle of a giant poster board and put that central message inside the circle. Then what you do is you start drawing spokes out from that circle and you just mind map it. You just say, okay, what is this realm of this central message, right? What's the piece of that? And then you start drawing things and start connecting things together and thinking through logically and pen in hand. What is the topic and what are subtopics? You start thinking about that at a very high level as you do it on paper, right? And then once you have your mind map completed, where you've got a central message and then you have these main topics branching out, and then from those main topics, you have what eventually will become chapter headings, right? So you can think of the central message as one, and then each of the individual components of that central message, those are book parts or chapters, depending on how you want to structure the book. And then you have branch outs from them, which are either paragraphs or sections of chapters or chapters, depending on how your brain thinks. And you don't really have to get that all down right away. The main thing is to get all the ideas out on paper as much as you can, right? Just high level topics. Then what you do is you take sticky notes, a whole bunch of sticky notes, okay? And you create the outline for your book. So you start by saying, okay, which of those bubbles around the central message do I want to hit first? Like what logically makes sense to talk about first? And what you do is you start lining up these sticky notes, right? With from top to bottom and left to right. So you have this giant board of sticky notes, like a matrix, so to speak, right? Where the first sticky note on the very first, the left-hand most column is chapter 1, right? And you have the title, and then you have all those subtopics that are off on the branch of that mind map underneath there. And that's the structure of chapter 1. And then chapter 2 is the same thing, so on and so forth. It could be another sub branch of that original level 1 branch off of your main central idea. And you just keep doing that until you have the entire structure of the book and you've covered all of the items on your mind map. They're on sticky notes, right? And the reason I do sticky notes is because sometimes you'll realize that you may want to take one component of the chapter and move it and swap it with another. Yeah. Because with sticky notes, you can easily, move things around. You can change the order, the sequence of the chapters, all of that stuff, right? When you're on sticky notes.
I'm writing a book. I'm in.
There you go, dude. I think you're going to like it. And then
dude, that's a really good breakdown. And obviously you said the self-publishing school helped you with all this. Where can I find that, or people find that? Is it just online? Is it a certain one?
It's an online course. You just go to self-publishing school. It's done by Chandler Bolt, and they'll be able to break it down for you a little bit more. And just to wrap up the thought there, Brandon, I have to get to this because once you have all of your sticky notes there, then you create a spreadsheet or you do something to keep track of your writing. And the number one key that they tell you in self-publishing school is when you have your outline right next to you and you're writing in Google Docs or in Scrivener or whatever, the number one rule is just keep writing. Even if you sound repetitive, never hit the backspace key. Even if you make a grammatical error or a spelling issue, whatever, just keep writing, because that's how writer's block happens. You start hitting the backspace button and then your brain starts thinking, well, what else can I edit? And that's not your job. Your job is not to edit. Your job is to create. If it's repetitive, it comes out repetitively, your editor will tell you that and they'll strike it out for you. So just keep writing, keep moving the pen or keep moving the typewriter, right? Or your keyboard, just keep moving on it. And make sure you just hit your word goal every day. That's it.
That's phenomenal. My issue with writing is I'm a fast typer. I'm not a very accurate typer. So
okay.
I look up and there's probably like 30 squiggly red lines, and it's like, man, I got to go correct those. That's not spelled right. But that's great advice, man. I'm gonna check out that self-publishing school. And for anyone out there that has ideas and you want to get them on paper and write a book, like Derek said, I see people all the time. I hand them a business card and they hand me a book sometimes. And I'm like, well, they've made it and I haven't, because they wrote a book. But that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to go into, as we get near the end of this thing, we always do a segment, Derek. It's called What Bruises Your Bananas. Since this is the Guerrilla Estate podcast, we talk about everything that's so great inside of real estate, everything great that you're doing, that we're doing. But in reality, there's stuff out there that we dislike. And that's the segment, What Bruises Your Bananas. So out of everything you've seen inside of real estate or inside of business or as a nomad, what bruises your bananas?
On the real estate side, I'll try to keep this brief. Turnovers really, they don't do it for me. By having a property management team that is incentivized to place a tenant and they get paid every time a tenant gets placed, sometimes the incentives can get misaligned, and turnovers are really expensive, because not only are you missing out on the revenue when they're gone and cleaning up their mess, you have to pay for cleaning up their mess. And yeah, there's a deposit that you hold back, but oftentimes it's not nearly enough to do what needs to be done to fix it. And so turnovers is like the number one headache that we're trying to track right now on our KPIs for all of the asset management on all of our properties. And so that's something that really gets to us is having turnover. So we try to reduce as much turnover as we can by keeping the tenant happy, constantly staying under market rents wherever possible. And just a tip here for those landlords out there, when renewal time comes up or the holidays come up, we either drop off turkeys, right, for Thanksgiving, or we'll go into the property and install something nice for them. Like we'll do a ceiling fan, or we'll do some sort of like ninja move where it seems like we're providing them something, but we're really improving the property while they're in it.
Yeah. So and that turkey is going to cost you $40 and the turnover is going to cost you $500.
Exactly. More like 2,000 these days because of labor shortages. Yeah. And also if you keep in mind too, that like you'll have a whole month of vacancy too, while you're trying to get that thing turned.
And that's the fear of single family with one door.
Yes, that's right.
I think that's a podcast for another day. But all right, I know you already mentioned your link and where people can find you. Why don't you do that one more time, Derek? Where can people get a hold of you, look you up, maybe learn something about being a nomad?
For sure. The easiest way to get to us is on social media. Obviously, you just have to search for my name. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, so please follow us there. But elevateequity.org is the place for everything us. If you want that next level, if you want the podcasts, the blogs, the videos, the travel blogs, which are coming out soon, we're going to be doing something there as well. But that's where you can find us.
Awesome, man. All right. Everyone knows the fee. Please share. If you learned something, made you smile, made you laugh, made you think, share this episode with a friend. Derek, thanks for coming on, man.
Brandon, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.
All right. See you.
Thanks for listening to the Guerrilla Estate Investing Podcast, where we give you the ground-pounding truth about what it takes to be successful in real estate. Learn more at realfocus.org/Guerrilla Estate Pod.